For giving to happen, there has to be two sides, a giver and a receiver, or the gift is not given. But it seems God's problem always is, how does God give away God? Although the gift of God's Spirit is free and available as your breath, God has trouble giving away God. We are never really ready to acknowledge the gift of the Spirit. We always seem to be interested in other things, money, power, success. We never really get around to what we were really created for. So let's look at a couple of everyday examples of how the Spirit works that I think are especially apropos during this time of isolation. If you've ever been to London and ridden on their subway, the London Tube as they call it, when the doors of the train open, there's a recorded announcement that says, "Mind the gap." There are signs in big letters above the doors and on the platform itself saying, "Mind the gap," reminding you of the space, the few inches in between the door of the train and the platform. They don't want you to trip and fall in the gap. And so too with the Holy Spirit, we need to mind the gap. The Holy Spirit is what fills the gap in everything. But first we need to be aware there's a gap. Sometimes we don't realize that God is as available as the breath in front of our mouth or as the wind blowing through a room. We seem to prefer God to be distant, to be elsewhere. In fact, it often seems to be a gap between ourselves and almost everything. And without the Holy Spirit to fill the gap, we aren't connected to anything or anybody. We're isolated. But somehow we all have a desire inside us to connect, to relate. There's something that always wants us to commune with others, with nature, with God. Something to fill the gap. That desire is the Holy Spirit. And here's another metaphor, a spark plug, such as the one in your lawnmower. A spark plug has two terminals separated by a gap. If there is sufficient voltage, a spark will jump from one terminal to the other across the gap. The spark will jump from the source, which is us, the inner source of the divine that dwells within each of us, to the other terminal, which is our desire. But the spark won't happen without that receptor terminal, that desire. We must want it. We must want the Spirit and say, "Come, Holy Spirit, fill the gap." Now, the gap is created largely from our minds, our resentments, our anxieties, judgment, anger. But in the science of the spark plug, the source is connected and the voltage wants somewhere to go. The Holy Spirit wants somewhere to go. We need to make the connection to be the receptor. God cannot give unless there's someone to receive. God created us to fill the gaps, to be aware and recognize that it is there, and that we are given the grace and gift and power through the Holy Spirit to fill the gap. And then there is a spark. It's usually a small spark, not overwhelming. Most of the time, we don't even notice the spark. It happens in little ways. We mind the gap and make the connection when we are polite to the cashier at Walmart. We mind the gap when we acknowledge someone with a nod and a smile, when we take a walk in the neighborhood. And we mind the gap when we appreciate a bird song or a beautiful sunset. Those are all little sparks. We are people of the Spirit. Jesus was trying to tell his disciples that his Spirit isn't elsewhere. It is as available and as close as the breath on their lips. And by his breathing upon them, he is saying, can you breathe in what I breathe out? It's always there and we can't live without it. We just need to desire it to make the connection. Today is often called the birthday of the church. It's the day as a community, the followers of Jesus decided they, and we, could overcome the gaps between us all. And we still need to take the everyday opportunities of little random acts of gratuitous love to continue to fill the gaps. Mind the gap.